Wow. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of What's Going On With. I am Jesse from Outgrow Your Garage, and today I am talking to Bill Shrum from Today I am talking to Bill Shrum from Downtown Colorado Inc., who they are a stellar organization that I have worked with a couple of times. And in a unusual thing for this particular programming, we are pre-recording this, which we don't usually do. Usually we're live. But Bill has meetings and things and actual work that happens on Wednesday mornings. So
It's Economic
um,
Development Week.
it is Economic
Yeah,
Development Week. So we are going to pre-record this and drop this in the future. And so I will let Bill introduce himself and what DCI does.
yeah. Thanks, Jesse. Really happy to be here. My name is Bill Shrum. I'm Director of Operations for Downtown Colorado Inc. DCI is a 44-year-old nonprofit organization that was founded to help with outreach, education, and advocacy around urban renewal. And that's kind of spread to more downtown-centric things like downtown development districts and business improvement districts and those kind of things. And we work with municipalities, those quasi-governmental districts, and then businesses and stakeholders around the state. So we serve all of Colorado, but only Colorado. And we've been doing it for quite a while and served lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of communities.
Yeah. So for people who are not familiar with economic development or are new to the field, when we're talking about urban renewal, what does that mean? Because it
Mm,
is something you see a lot where somebody comes to town, they're like, "Oh yeah, we're going to renew this, we're going to revitalize downtown," and you're like,
yeah,
"I don't. What does that mean?" So when DCI goes in to support urban renewal in an area, what does that actually look like? How do you talk about
yeah, that's a great question, Jesse. I like and here's the thing with words, right? Like they can mean all sorts of things to different people. And if you're not careful about that, it can kind of get you in trouble. And I think urban renewal itself didn't necessarily start off with the best of like responses from the public just because of the way it was used. Some of the other terms that are common in urban renewal are like blighting factors, right? And like no one who has a community that they're proud of is like, I'm not blighted. Like, what do how dare you condemn me like that, right? Um, so urban renewal is technically, according to the Urban Renewal Authority statute, not supposed to do economic development. It's really supposed to be the remediation of blighting factors, right? And we know anecdotally that when you do that, it makes places much more appealing. It enables properties in very often strategic locations in communities to come back into play and to be viable for redevelopment and infill. So it spurs and catalyzes economic development, but it's not necessarily supposed to be doing that from the jump. There are other things though that do, like downtown development authorities are involved in this space. They can prevent blighting factors, and that's a little bit more economic development focused. Business improvement districts are very much economic development focused. Um, so it it's important to quantify when you're saying urban renewal. If you're talking urban renewal authority, yeah, that's not technically kind of what they're supposed to do. Um, and for what it's worth, actually, so I just this past week was chosen as chair of the Boulder Urban Renewal Authority. So I have my head in that stuff, both from the DCI perspective and like taking care of Boulder in that sense too, right? Um, so that's one part of it, but I think the other part is that DCI in particular, when we say urban renewal, we look at it from a placemaking perspective, right? Because the reality is that when you do all of this stuff right, it's generating value and it's generating love in a community's place, right? And that cuts across politics, it cuts across businesses. Like it's really pretty agnostic, but it speaks to the community's characters and the community's values. And when you can represent that in a physical form, it makes places that people really care about, that they love, that they want to spend their time in. And when you do that, like the business community thrives on that, being adjacent to it or helping to activate it or, to have some role in perpetuating that activity. But as far as urban renewal is concerned, and when you're focused on the place and you're authentic about representing that community's values, um, it's really hard to mess it up because you're listening to the people. You're not coming in from above and telling them this is how it's got to be. Because we know that that's just that doesn't work, you know.
Yeah. And so you were pretty instrumental in developing a program through DCI called the Challenge Program that
Mm.
really helps communities think through how do they do some of this urban renewal? How do they create places? How do they solve whatever their challenges are, whether that's something like brownfields or areas that have been heavily polluted, all
Yeah.
the way up to how do you move on in the future once you've done some of that placemaking work. And so talk a little bit
Mm,
about what that
mm.
program is and kind of like how it came about.
Yeah, the challenge program is really sweet. I think we're going into our ninth cohort, no, 10th cohort, ninth year of challenge program, which is wild. It started off as a program in conjunction with the School of Public Affairs and at CU Denver in the master's program. And I was a student in that program in 2018 and 2019. And I was the assistant to the town manager in Eagle, Colorado, and Eagle was in that program, and I was a student in that program. So I was like a participant, right, back in the day. And from that point forward, kind of even when it was with the challenge program, it was around or with the School of Public Affairs, it was around recognizing that so often communities, especially in like more rural communities, where space is really precious, like when you only have a couple of blocks in your commercial core, having one or two sites not really functioning as well as they should can make a huge difference, right? And so we call those catalyst sites. And it's all about like how do you turn that one challenge into an opportunity? And from a design perspective, you know, design thinking folks love parameters and boundaries and those difficult things because like to really nerd out about it, does the best designs are localized to the situation, right? It takes the constraints behind a design and turns it into a unique leverage point, right? Like that design could only happen because it's solving issues within that sort of constraint. And we find that same sort of philosophy working a lot when it comes to infill development and other catalyst sites, right? Like that one site is a challenge because of you know, like you mentioned, brownfields, like maybe there was some potential environmental remediation, or maybe there's some demographic issues where a community's, you know, core, the main job, you know, the 20 to 35s have left the community, right? And so you don't have a lot of workers, or, you know, there's all these different reasons why, you know, an economic project could kind of go wrong. When you can figure that out within that community, within that site, and what it looks like in that site, overcome those challenges and turn it into a solution that is unique and localized and represents the sort of community's best interests. Um, that's what that program is all about, is being able to help communities ask the questions if they haven't come at it from that perspective before, to understand like what are the challenges that I care about and like what can I solve and what are the things that are beyond my control, who can I reach out to for help and what are the additional resources? And I know, you know, Outgrow Your Garage is really good about this because there's tons of these statewide and national resources to help people in these industries. But man, when you're an entrepreneur, like how the heck are you supposed to be an urban planner and you're an architect and like you're HR and like all of these other things all at once? Like that's impossible, right? But when you know who to call, you can get that insight and process it and you know actually make that actionable, right? So you know knowing who the resources are to solve certain you know problems that you might have, and then being able to understand how do you work with a coalition, being the community, like the town, a variety of different stakeholders that are involved in this work, and like what does the next step look like? And that's another real, I think, hurdle that people get caught up with. Being an entrepreneur is about like having a vision in your head of something that doesn't exist and like manifesting it into the world and being able to do that but step by step at a time, right? I think that's one of the super secret things that entrepreneurs are really good at is breaking down these big concepts into actionable steps, right? But sometimes that big concept can be so overwhelming and daunting that you don't know where to start. And so in the challenge program we really try to focus on making sure that communities and projects leave that program with like a list of literally what can I do tomorrow that's going to advance my project's needs. And I understand what that overall horizon looks like. It might not exactly turn out that way, but I know where I'm headed and I know kind of what that route looks like and I know what my next step looks like. When you can do that, you come out of that program way more empowered about how to turn that site, that challenge site, into an opportunity. And we love to see that stuff happen all throughout the state.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think is true about a lot of areas, rural, urban, business corridors, whatever, regardless of the type of community development you're doing, that question of what is solvable by me and where do I need help
Mm,
is such a helpful determination just to have that.
totally.
And I feel like a lot of the times when Our Career Garage goes into communities, whether we're teaching entrepreneur workshops or whether we're working on some longer term planning with the local government or library or economic developer or whoever, a lot of the work we do is in that same piece of what is actually manageable, what is going to fit within your resources, where can you start, how do you talk to the community about some of the things they need. And so we've done everything from hosting listening sessions to teaching workshops specifically based on those listening sessions, to helping communities plan out the next 5 years of how do you even create business owners
Mm,
in general or have
yep,
any
yep.
sort of programming for that, so that they can fill in some of those downtown spaces.
Yeah,
Because you can have all the downtown dreams in the world, but you need people who are willing to come in and fill that space, or you need the
yeah,
resources to kind of help activate whatever that space is. There was a
yeah,
community, I think, actually at the from the challenge program maybe 2 years ago,
yeah,
who was had a corner that had like a gas station on one side and then they had nothing on the other side. And so they were
yep.
trying to figure out when you come off the highway, how do you activate this space so that it becomes appealing and the first thing you see in town isn't a gas station and a vacant lot before
Yeah,
you hit
I
that
remember the
that
one you're
historic
talking about.
downtown.
Yep.
Right. And so I
Yeah.
think that idea of like, how do you make your town appealing to come into is a great first step in figuring out those
Hmm.
pieces. And I think vacant lots are always really interesting because we have this idea of, oh, you drive past that vacant lot and maybe it has a fence around it, or maybe it's got a bunch of trash that kind of hangs out on it. So, how do you keep those vacant lots as a place that you look at and you go, oh, this could be something, I think is a big question a lot.
Hmm.
And I think a lot
Hmm.
about trash and waste diversion in rural areas anyway, just because
Right,
we lack a
right.
lot of resources in
Yeah,
these
yeah.
areas. And so I've also been in communities where somebody wants to come in and start a business, and the physical ability for them to do that business is rough because of how the infrastructure in that community is set up, whether that's they would really like access to recycling facilities that aren't close, or I've seen a number of people start composting businesses in rural areas in the last several years because a lot
Hmm.
of rural
Hmm.
areas just don't have
Just
access
don't
to a
have it.
commercial
Yep.
composter. Yeah. So it's been really interesting, but that's a whole other so you helped develop the challenge program and you helped
Yeah.
build some of this programming and do that initial thinking of how do you set up a training program that helps people think through these steps of what is achievable, what can I actually do,
Mm,
what is going to be applicable to this community, and how do I talk to my community about it. So when you started building out that programming, where did you
yeah.
even start with that kind of question?
Where where do you even start? Well, a couple of things to back up there. So first off, I do work pretty closely along with our rural programs manager, Kylie Rashawn, and she's the one who for the past 6 years has been really kind of overseeing the program and it's like the implementation day to day with the communities, right? And so her and I have a really great sort of working relationship where I can bring in some of like this overall methodology of how to like from my urban planning slash like public administration background and like business startups. I didn't even mention I have started other businesses before I got into the public sector. So this is not my first or
Uh,
like 10th rodeo, right? Um, so like I have that perspective, but Kylie also helps like with her experience in the challenge program understand how to localize it into something smaller communities can manage and everything. So it's very much a sort of team effort and the direction that we got from working with Randy Harrison and the School of Public Affairs at CU Denver, that sort of syllabi of intention and topics helped the genesis of where we are now, right? So
Yeah,
again,
I
it's a
do
village.
always like to say you don't have to be good at everything. Your
Yeah,
organization has to be good at everything. And
yeah,
so,
absolutely. Especially as an entrepreneur too, I think one of the biggest strengths you can have is to recognize where you need help. And I think you mentioned that, but I've had to learn that the hard way, right? Sometimes we get it in our heads that it has to be our way, and the reality is that when you can let go of a little bit and you're steering the ship, right? And you recognize that someone might be a better sailor than you, you're likely to get where you need to go when you sort of expand your network. But all that to be said, our change in our sort of methodology really focused around a project that we're working on with Kansas State University right now around trying to track the economic impact of brownfield investment over time. And I think while KSU Tab has their motivations for understanding and leveraging that brownfield investment, and again, brownfields very quickly are a site that has a perceived or a real potential environmental remediation need, right, to be brought back up to um, a working standard, right, something that does not require additional investment, and real or perceived is really important there. But all that to be said, they know that they have huge economic impact and leverage when they work with communities and work on these sites. But the EPA for the longest time has always been kind of like they walk up right to the edge of where, hey, the dirt gets cleaned and the site is ready, and then they move on to the next because their charge is not to like make money. Just like urban renewal,
mhm.
their charge is not economic development, it's blight remediation or something else. But we know that it has that impact. And when we asked that question ourselves and sort of broke it down into the pieces of what do you need to do that effectively, it's a lot more complicated than what that first sentence kind of came off as. And so I'll detail where we came at this. First off, we needed to put together an education program that would help walk people through it because I think again going back to some of that knowledge specialty that comes with being an entrepreneur and knowing your space. You can be an expert in certain spaces, but sometimes you have to sort of dabble in others. And if you don't have that language or you don't have that experience, at least in a passing level, it's very hard to participate, right? And so we had to ensure that as we work through this program, that people understand when we say these words what they mean, right? We're all coming at it from the same way. Um, so that education part is really key. The second part is that we're really bought into this idea that communities have a certain capacity for this work, right? And that capacity includes measuring or considering things that are not tangible all the time, right? I mean, again, a lot of the examples that you just talked about with the role of a main street and certain sites being prepared for proper business, right? It can sometimes take years for um, interior engineering work, for planning work, for code enforcement, to prep a site before a business is really viable in that location, right? All of those things that have to happen ahead of time actually add value to the end result, but they're not really tangible in the ways that we expect, right? When you don't see the butcher paper over the windows come down, you're like, what's going on that building? How come it's not done yet? And you're like, we're doing a lot of other stuff that you have to do to get where you're going, right? And so it took a really holistic sort of review of what those steps are and what that looks like in communities around the state because different communities are at different stages. And one thing I'm convinced about is that not to say that communities can't achieve more or try to do more, but you can really get yourself in trouble, trying to eat the elephant if your capacity is like at a 2 or a 3 and you're trying to do a project that's like at a 7. Like if you just don't have the rest of that there, it's going to take a whole lot of money or a whole lot of leadership or a whole lot of outside support to just make something happen that wouldn't organically happen, right? So understanding that capacity is really key. And then also again rooting it on the in the community goals and making sure that like as you work through these sites that you're achieving these larger community goals because when you can do that you'll have community support rather than vitriol when it comes to a planning and zoning meeting. You know, if you're trying to like do a development, if you're doing something that is like aligned with that community vision, you want that help. You want people volunteering to be like, hey, I know a guy that can help you here. Or have you thought about coordinating with this person and that person to like add more to what that becomes? Like especially in small towns, like everyone sort of has these strengths, but when you can come together and have each of those strengths leveraged appropriately, I mean, that's the same as the value ecosystem in small business, right? You keep your specialists in areas where they add value, right? And the whole process becomes better. And the same with the challenge program and how we like to identify the different stakeholders. And when you're aligned with that community vision, different stakeholders have their strengths. They stay in their lane and you can utilize all of that cohesively together to get your broader project done, right? So with all of that in place, we try to talk about what it looks like for a project's feasibility, like what steps the community, what role does the community have in helping to make projects viable or not? Are they kind of getting in their own way? Because they do, spoiler alert. But do they know that they're getting into their own way, right? And then lastly, like how can we sort of help community projects find resources in places that they may not know about? We talked about that before, but knowingly introducing that as part of the curriculum in the challenge program gives those communities an opportunity to ask the right questions of the right people rather than spin their wheels and think they have to solve every problem themselves. So
Yeah.
it's kind of complicated, right? But at the end of the day, when you line it all up and you have a big enough Rolodex of people to call, it's a really fun process. And to see the sites that have been in the program and the work that's come out of it and the impact it can have in Colorado communities is really, really cool. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that is really interesting about the approach you talked about of kind of bringing in the stakeholders and doing community meetings and having these things show up in your zoning and your planning meetings, and having access for the public to be able to see what's going on, that transparency can really help people understand why the process takes
Yes.
so long. One of the things that's very common in rural communities, because they have historically been built along the only road or the train tracks, or by the river, there's certain places that you see towns pop up. So your rural areas, a lot of times, their main street doubles as a highway, right? It is a
Yeah.
numbered highway that runs through Main Street a lot.
Yep.
And in Colorado, at least, that means that CDOT has the final
Yay,
say
CDOT.
on
It's
on what goes
they're our
on.
favorite.
Right? And so, but I think a lot of members of the public don't realize that it's really hard
Yeah,
to do things on your main street sometimes because you have to work with these entities that operate on a different pace or have other
totally right.
priorities they need to have. And so when you have this transparency, you can say, yes, we would really love the ADA accessible entrance on this building to be facing Main Street. You're right. But we don't have the clearance for it because
Hmm.
CDOT highway ends here and there's not enough space for
Yeah,
that ramp. And
if you
so we
don't have the
had to
right of
put
way
it
or
around
something
the
like that.
corner.
Yeah,
And so you just kind of run into these interesting issues that you see. And so I think that transparency piece can be really huge for people understanding the scale of the problems that you're managing sometimes.
totally.
And even if the scale isn't that big, sometimes you're operating at the speed of government.
Hmm. Let me echo two things you said because I really, really, really appreciate that. Like day one in my Masters of Public Administration program, day one, the instructor basically said that if you're in local government, well, government in general, but local government in particular, if you're not working to build trust with the work that you're doing it wrong. Like that, like Occam's razor for local government is literally like every action needs to build trust in your government. If it doesn't, right, there will always be sort of consequences to that. It could be misinformation, it could be misunderstanding, it could be without alignment of motivations, it could be all sorts of different things, right? Um, but the way that our whole government system works is that people have to trust that someone else can make decisions that impact their life, right? Um, so that's really really key, and I appreciate you brought that up because again, if you are a local government person, and I mean, again, I'm with you 99.9% of the time. I'm not going to disparage local government folks, but if you're not focused on building trust with your community, like start there and you will find much more success. But the second thing you said that's also, I think, really key is that especially in small towns, this is kind of, it might be tough medicine for some to hear, but I really think this is the truth. The process is the most important thing, right? Because when you have an open and transparent process like you're talking about, people can buy into the solution even if they don't want that solution, right? It's about building consensus. You may get what you want, right? But politics is about triangulating multiple different perspectives, right? No single person, big or small community, literally knows the right answer for how that community operates, right? It's always a triangulation. And the issue is that if you have a process that works well and builds trust and demonstrates transparency, you can have an outcome that might not be exactly like what you envisioned, but you can be satisfied with the result, right? And I think another part where local government folks who are trying to do economic development kind of start to get hung up or tripped up and need to take it back to local government basics is that you can have, and you never want this, but you can have a bad outcome from an economic development decision. You can invest your money in a place that ends up going belly up, right? You can take out municipal bonds for a project that you're totally bought into and the bonds don't pay out, right? So then the city's on the hook to pay it off, right? You can make decisions with bad outcomes, but if you followed a trustworthy process, you always get the chance to do it again, right? Might be slower, it might be, there might be complications, but you can do it again. If you take a bad process approach, the people don't trust you, and you can't do a process again without significantly changing how you're approaching it, right? And so again, when that nexus of like business community plus local government kind of working together to get that work done, I hope that local government folks maybe take that process idea to mind, to heart. And then conversely, I hope the business community understands that like it's impractical for a business owner to go into a local government. Like when I had my coffee shop here in Boulder, if I went into the city of Boulder and said, I want you to do this, this, this for me, and I pay your taxes, they're going to show me the door, man. Like, who am I? Who am I? Right? There are so many things bigger than me and my business, right? The city should tell me, hey, there's a process for this. And if you follow this process, it's the same for you and it's the same for every other business. You're likely to get an outcome that you're happy with, right? But if you're a business owner and you're trying to work with the city and you're trying to tell the city what's what, like that works inside the four walls of your shop, but that's not
Hmm.
how government works, right? And as long as we understand that there's differences there, people can play together really, really well.
Hmm. Yeah. And that process piece is really huge. And you can, once you have a good process, it is replicable. You can do it again. It can smooth the
Yes.
way for people. It is really delightful. So we are coming to the end of our
Hmm.
half hour, which is usually about how long I like to keep these. So what do you want people to know as a closing out? How do we find you? What are resources you like? What do you, anything you want to share as an
All
ending?
the things, huh? Yeah. So downtowncoloradoinc.org is the main page. If you do / challenge dash program, or just go to challenge program on the website, you can obviously pull that up. One of the other things that I would recommend is bit.ly / capital DRT goals. G is capitalized there. That is like the starting tool to get into like all the things that we help build. If you're interested, it's designed for anyone to take, any stakeholder who's interested in their community goals and vision. They can take that assessment and start the process of better understanding what their community vision is. And ideally like include your community, like economic development folks on what it would look like to have them use these tools. The tools are free. Like, thank you EPA, KSU Tab, and for all the folks that contributed to this. But the tools are free, and the whole point is to try and help Colorado communities and communities around the country at some point utilize some of this methodology for doing good process, like you just said. Like good process is something that you can duplicate and scale, right? And that's what we're trying to do with these tools. So I'd love for folks to give it a shot, and hopefully it can help their communities.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, we are pre-recording this, so I have no idea what will happen the week after this, since I haven't set a date for when we're going to air it yet. But if you're watching, if you're tuning in, thanks again for watching. Check the description below to see the resources that Bill was talking about. And as always, let us know in the comments if you have any other questions or if there's topics you want to see us talk about here on What's Going On.